Sarah Thompson's heels clicked against the polished marble floors of the Metropolitan Courthouse, each step echoing her determination. The morning sunlight streamed through towering windows, casting long shadows across the historic building's interior. Her teaching portfolio, filled with 5 years of exemplary evaluations and student achievement records, provided a familiar comfort against her side. At 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes early for her hearing, Sarah found herself observing the proceedings from the back row of Courtroom 304. Her dark eyes tracked the methodical way Judge William Reeves handled each case, noting how his wire-rimmed glasses slipped down his nose whenever he leaned forward to examine documents. The judge's reputation had preceded him. 28 years on the bench, known for running what local attorneys called a tight ship. Yet as Sarah watched, she noticed subtle variations in his demeanor. When a young marketing executive presented his case for a parking violation, Judge Reeves engaged in casual banter about golf courses. When an elderly woman struggled to understand her citation, he spoke with practiced patience, carefully explaining each detail. Sarah pulled out her small notebook, a habit from her teaching days, and began jotting down observations. The leather-bound book still held sticky notes from yesterday's third-grade science lesson on objective observations. "Record what you see, not what you feel," she had told her students. Now she followed her own advice. 9:15 a.m. Case dismissed with warning. Parking violation. 9:22 a.m. Fine reduced by 50%. Expired registration. 9:27 a.m. Standard fine applied. Illegal turn. A familiar flutter of anxiety touched her stomach, but Sarah pushed it aside. She thought of her father's words from last night's phone call. "Baby girl, you've got nothing to be nervous about. You've got truth on your side." Her father, a retired postal worker who had taught her to drive in empty parking lots at dawn, had helped her gather all the evidence: photographs of the intersection, weather reports from the day in question, even a statement from a shop owner who had witnessed the entire incident. The bailiff's voice cut through her thoughts. Next case, Thompson, Sarah E. Traffic violation, 2024, TC 487. Sarah gathered her materials and moved forward. As she approached the podium, she caught fragments of whispered conversations. "That's the AP teacher from Lincoln Elementary. My nephew had her last year. Best teacher he's. Heard she won that innovation award." The familiar warmth of pride helped steady her nerves. In her classroom, she taught her students about civic responsibility, about standing up for what they believed in while remaining respectful. Today, she would model those very lessons. Judge Reeves barely glanced up from his desk as she arranged her documents. His fingers drummed an impatient rhythm against his bench, a sharp contrast to his relaxed demeanor from moments before. When he finally looked at her, his expression had hardened into something she hadn't seen him display with previous defendants, a mixture of dismissal and irritation before she'd even spoken a word. "Miss Thompson," he said, drawing out each syllable like he was addressing one of her third graders, "are you contesting citation 2024, TC 487? Sarah straightened her spine, channeling the confidence she carried in her classroom. "Yes, Your Honor. I have evidence that I believe will show." The sound of his gavel cutting off her words echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. The abrupt silence following Judge Reeves' gavel hung in the air like static before a storm. Sarah maintained her composure, though her carefully organized papers trembled slightly in her hands. She watched as Judge Reeves peered at her citation over his reading glasses, his mouth set in a thin line. "Let's review the officer's statement," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of routine. But there was nothing routine about the way he was handling her case. Sarah had spent the entire morning watching him interact with other defendants, and the contrast was impossible to ignore. Just 15 minutes earlier, she had witnessed his interaction with Michael Preston, a real estate agent charged with the same violation. Preston had fumbled through his explanation, yet Judge Reeves had nodded encouragingly, even chuckling at Preston's self-deprecating joke about needing GPS for his morning coffee run. Now, as Sarah attempted to present her evidence, Judge Reeves kept his eyes fixed on the papers before him. Officer Richards states that at approximately 7:45 a.m. on Tuesday, March 15th, you made an illegal lane change at the intersection of Maple and 4th Street. Your Honor, if I may, Sarah began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She reached for the photographs she'd taken the very next day, showing the confusing lane markings that had since been repainted. The construction in that area had temporarily. Miss Thompson, Judge Reeves interrupted, removing his glasses with deliberate slowness. Are you suggesting that a veteran officer of 15 years misinterpreted what he clearly saw? The question hung in the air like bait, but Sarah refused to take it. Instead, she drew upon the same patience she used when handling difficult parent-teacher conferences. No, Your Honor, I'm presenting evidence that shows how recent construction created a temporarily confusing situation for all drivers. I have documentation from the City Works Department confirming. Documentation. Judge Reeves' eyebrows rose as he cut her off again. Several observers in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Miss Thompson, this is traffic court, not a doctoral dissertation defense. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the courtroom, but they quickly died as Sarah pulled out her next piece of evidence. It was a statement from Mr. Chen, the owner of the corner flower shop, who had witnessed multiple near accidents that same morning due to the unclear markings. Your Honor, I have a sworn statement from a business owner at that intersection who observed. Miss Thompson, Judge Reeves' voice carried a sharp edge now, one that hadn't been present during any previous cases. This court's time is valuable. We're here to address a simple traffic violation, not to conduct an investigation into city infrastructure. From her position at her clerk's desk, Maria Rodriguez felt her jaw tighten. She'd been working for the court for only 6 months, but she'd never seen Judge Reeves dismiss evidence without at least reviewing it. Her fingers moved swiftly across her keyboard, documenting every word. Sarah took a deep breath, remembering the faces of her students during their recent lesson on the justice system. Justice means everyone gets a fair chance to tell their story, she had told them. The memory strengthened her resolve. Your Honor, I understand the court's time is valuable. That's precisely why I've prepared a concise presentation of relevant evidence that directly pertains to this case. As a citizen exercising my right to contest this citation, I believe I'm entitled to present my defense fully. The courtroom fell silent. Even the usual shuffling of papers ceased. Judge Reeves' face flushed a deep shade of red, and his next words would set in motion events that would ripple far beyond the walls of courtroom 304. Judge Reeves leaned forward, his chair creaking under the shift in weight. $300, he announced, his voice carrying a finality that sent murmurs rippling through the courtroom. It was triple the standard fine for a lane violation. Sarah blinked, her teacher's salary flashing through her mind. Your Honor, the standard fine for this violation is $100. I don't understand. Make that $350, Judge Reeves snapped, his face darkening. Would you like to continue this discussion, Miss Thompson? At her desk, Maria Rodriguez's fingers hovered over her keyboard. 5 years of law school and 6 months of clerking had taught her the intricacies of proper judicial conduct. This wasn't it. Her eyes darted to her phone, where she'd been recording the audio of proceedings, a standard practice for court documentation. Today, that routine recording felt more important than ever. Sarah stood perfectly still, her hands folded neatly over her portfolio. Years of managing classroom conflicts had taught her that sometimes silence spoke louder than words. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as other defendants waiting for their cases watched the scene unfold. Miss Thompson, Judge Reeves continued, his voice dripping with condescension. Perhaps you need a lesson in courtroom etiquette. Your persistent questioning of authority and excessive documentation suggests a lack of respect for this court's time and expertise. From her vantage point, Maria noticed Sarah's shoulders stiffen, but her voice remained remarkably steady. I appreciate the court's time, Your Honor. I simply wish to present evidence relevant to my case, as is my right. Judge Reeves' response was immediate. $400, Miss Thompson. Would you like to try for more? The injustice of the moment crystallized for Maria. She glanced at the previous cases in her notes. Michael Preston, similar violation, fine reduced to $50. Janet Williams, same intersection, case dismissed with warning. The pattern was undeniable. As Sarah gathered her materials with dignified calm, Maria made a decision. She quickly scribbled on her business card, adding her personal cell number and a note. Legal Aid Society. Tuesday mornings, 9 a.m. Please come. This isn't right. The next few moments unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. As Sarah walked past the clerk's desk, Maria accidentally dropped her pen. When Sarah instinctively bent to help pick it up, Maria smoothly pressed the card into her hand, their eyes meeting for just a moment. In that brief exchange, Maria saw something in Sarah's eyes that wasn't defeat, it was determination. The same look she'd seen in the mirror during her final year of law school when everyone said she couldn't make it. As Sarah left the courtroom, whispers followed. Did you see that? Never seen him react like that before. She didn't even raise her voice. Maria turned to her computer, opening a fresh document. At the top, she typed, Observed Judicial Conduct. Case number 2024, TC 487. Her fingers moved swiftly as she documented everything. The disparate treatment, the escalating fines, the dismissed evidence, the tone and language used. 5 years of legal training had taught her to be thorough, objective, and precise. She glanced at Judge Reeves, now calling the next case as if nothing unusual had happened. But something had happened, and Maria knew that Sarah Thompson's quiet dignity in the face of injustice would not go unnoticed. Sometimes, she thought, the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of courage, like picking up a dropped pen. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, the business card from Maria lying next to a stack of unmarked science quizzes. The warm glow of her reading lamp cast shadows across the scattered papers, her carefully prepared evidence, now seemingly useless, and the court notice demanding $400 within 30 days. Her phone buzzed again, another message from her father. How did it go, baby girl? She hadn't been able to bring herself to answer him yet. The memory of his pride when she'd become a teacher, his constant reminders about standing up for what's right, made the day's events even harder to process. Sarah reached for her laptop, opening a fresh email to her principal. She'd need to request a substitute for Tuesday morning if she decided to visit the Legal Aid Society. The cursor blinked steadily, waiting for her decision. Was it worth pursuing? The questions tumbled through her mind as she remembered her students' faces during last week's social studies lesson. Miss Thompson, little Marcus had asked, if something's not fair, how do you fix it? The memory pulled her back to her classroom, where a poster of Martin Luther King Jr. watched over daily lessons about character and courage. What message would she be sending to Marcus, to all her students, if she simply paid the unfair fine and stayed silent? Her phone lit up with a text from her best friend, Jasmine. Girl, you're trending on the local community forum. Someone posted about what happened in court today. Sarah's heart raced as she quickly logged in. There it was, a detailed post from someone who'd been in the courtroom, describing the entire incident. The comments section was alive with similar stories. Last month, same judge reduced my neighbor's fine for the exact same thing. Been in his courtroom twice, completely different experiences. Someone needs to look into this. As she scrolled through the comments, her phone rang. An unknown number. Sarah hesitated before answering. Miss Thompson. The voice was warm, professional. This is James Chen from the Legal Aid Society. One of our clerks mentioned you might be calling, and I just read about your experience online. I'd like to talk with you about it, if you're willing. Sarah glanced at the clock. 9:45 p.m. A lawyer calling this late meant something significant. Mr. Chen, I appreciate the call, but I'm not sure if I should. Miss Thompson, he interrupted gently, I understand your hesitation, but our office has received similar reports about Judge Reeves before. Most people choose not to pursue it further, which is understandable, but sometimes staying silent only perpetuates the problem. Sarah's eyes drifted to her classroom planning book, open to next week's lesson on civic responsibility. The irony wasn't lost on her. What would pursuing this mean? She asked, her voice stronger now. First, we document everything properly. Then we file a formal complaint with the Judicial Conduct Board. It's not about personal revenge. It's about ensuring equal treatment under the law. Your case could help prevent similar situations in the future. Sarah thought about Marcus's question again. How do you fix something that's not fair? Maybe this was how. Not with angry protests or social media rants, but with careful documentation, proper channels, and quiet persistence. Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., she said finally. I'll be there. After hanging up, Sarah finally replied to her father's message. Dad, remember when you taught me that doing the right thing isn't always easy? I'm about to put that lesson to the test. She turned back to her laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The substitute request email would have to wait. Instead, she opened a new document and began typing. Personal statement. Events of March 19th, 2024. Courtroom 304. James Chen's office at the Legal Aid Society buzzed with focused energy as he spread dozens of case files across his desk. The morning sun cast long shadows through the Venetian blinds, creating stripes across the documentation of Judge Reeves' previous cases. Sarah sat across from him, watching as he input data into a specialized analysis program. This is remarkable, James murmured, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. In the past 6 months alone, there's a clear pattern. His fingers flew across the keyboard, creating a visualization that made Sarah lean forward in her chair. The computer screen displayed a color-coded chart showing fine amounts for similar violations. The disparity was impossible to ignore. James pointed to specific cases. Here, last month, identical violation, $40 fine. 2 weeks ago, another one dismissed entirely. Yet in cases like yours. His voice trailed off as he continued typing. Sarah watched as more data populated the screen. How did you gather all this information? James smiled, revealing laugh lines around his eyes. Public records, mostly. But the real breakthrough came from Maria Rodriguez, your friend from the courthouse. She's been documenting irregularities for months, waiting for someone willing to come forward. The door opened, and Maria herself walked in, carrying a thick folder. I brought everything, she said, placing it on James's desk. 6 months of audio recordings, transcripts, and personal observations. She turned to Sarah. You're not alone in this. The difference is, you're willing to speak up. James began organizing the new materials, his movements precise and methodical. Maria's documentation is crucial. As a court clerk, her observations carry significant weight. But your case, Sarah, provides something we haven't had before. Clear, irrefutable evidence of disparate treatment in a single session. He pulled up the courthouse security footage from Sarah's hearing day. Look here, he pointed to timestamps. 3 similar cases, 3 vastly different outcomes, all within an hour. The only variable. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Sarah watched the silent footage of herself standing at the podium, maintaining composure despite the judge's increasingly hostile behavior. It felt surreal seeing it from this perspective. What happens next? She asked, her teacher's instinct for clear procedures kicking in. James leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. We file a formal complaint with the Judicial Conduct Board. But first, we build an airtight case. He turned to his dual monitors, pulling up a complex spreadsheet. We've analyzed over 200 similar cases from Judge Reeves' court. The pattern is statistically significant. Maria stepped forward, pointing to specific entries. Notice these timestamps and fine amounts. The disparities aren't subtle anymore. He's gotten bolder over time, probably because no one has challenged him. Sarah studied the data, her analytical mind, honed by years of assessing student progress, picking up the patterns. "These numbers tell a story," she said quietly. "Just like I tell my students, data doesn't lie." James nodded approvingly. "Exactly. We're not making accusations without evidence. We're letting the numbers speak for themselves." He pulled up a draft of the formal complaint. "This goes beyond just your case, Sarah. We're looking at systematic issues that affect hundreds of people." As the afternoon light shifted in the office, the three of them continued working, building a case that would be impossible to ignore. Sarah thought about her students again, imagining explaining this moment to them. Sometimes justice requires not just courage, but patience, precision, and partnership. "There's one more thing," James said, turning to a new screen. "We found something in Judge Reeves' past rulings that changes everything." Taylor Martinez drummed her fingers against her coffee cup, studying the spreadsheets and documents spread across her desk at the Metro Daily News. After 15 years of investigative reporting, she developed an instinct for important stories. This one made her journalistic radar buzz like a live wire. "Look at this pattern," James Chen explained, pointing to the data visualization on his laptop. He'd been careful in approaching the press, selecting Taylor for her reputation for thorough, balanced reporting. Over the past 3 years, the disparity in Judge Reeves' rulings has increased by 47%. Taylor's eyes narrowed as she studied the charts. "And you can verify all of this?" "Every single case," Maria Rodriguez confirmed, her clerk's badge catching the newsroom's fluorescent light. "I've provided complete documentation, including official transcripts and audio recordings." Sarah sat quietly, watching the reporter's expression change as she processed the information. She remembered Taylor's previous articles, always factual, never sensational. That's why James had chosen her. "There's more," James said, pulling up another document. "We've discovered that in 2019, Judge Reeves attended a judicial training seminar where he openly questioned the need for bias awareness programs. The following week, the pattern in his rulings began to shift dramatically." Taylor leaned forward, her reporter's instincts fully engaged. "Do you have proof of his comments?" "Better," Maria interjected, sliding forward a thumb drive. "I have the video. It was part of the court's mandatory training archives. In it, Judge Reeves argues that excessive focus on bias could undermine judicial authority." The reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard, taking notes. "This isn't just about traffic violations anymore, is it?" "No," Sarah spoke up for the first time. "It's about ensuring everyone gets fair treatment in our justice system. My students learn about equal protection under the law. They deserve to see it in practice." Taylor turned to Sarah, her expression softening. "Would you be willing to go on record? Share your experience?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Yes, but not out of anger or revenge. This needs to be about positive change, about making our system better." The story broke 3 days later, appearing first on the Metro Daily News website. PATER of PREGUDIC. Data REVEALS DISPARITIES in Local QUART by Taylor Martinez. The article was masterfully crafted, leading with Sarah's experience, but quickly expanding to show the broader pattern. Taylor had included statements from other defendants, statistical analysis from legal experts, and carefully documented evidence of the systematic disparities. Within hours, the story went viral. Local TV stations picked it up. Then regional news. Social media exploded with similar stories from Judge Reeves' courtroom. Former defendants began coming forward, sharing their experiences with Taylor. In her classroom, Sarah maintained her usual calm demeanor, but her phone buzzed constantly with notifications. During her lunch break, she read messages of support from fellow teachers, parents, and community members. "Thank you for speaking up. My brother had the same experience. You're teaching our children by example. James called that afternoon. The Judicial Conduct Board is expediting their review. They're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow. But it was Maria's text that truly captured the moment's significance. Check your email. You need to see what just arrived in Judge Reeves' inbox. Sarah opened her email to find Maria's forwarded message. A letter from Mrs. Eleanor Johnson, an 82-year-old grandmother who'd appeared in Judge Reeves' court the previous year. Its contents would prove to be the unexpected catalyst for what happened next. Judge William Reeves sat alone in his chambers, the morning sun casting long shadows across his desk. His computer screen displayed Mrs. Eleanor Johnson's letter, words that had kept him awake all night. Dear Judge Reeves, I sat in your courtroom last year with my grandson Marcus. He was there to contest a parking ticket, but I had a different purpose. You see, 57 years ago, I stood before another judge who refused to hear my evidence, who decided my fate before I spoke a word. When I watched you with that teacher, Miss Thompson, I saw the same dismissal in your eyes that I witnessed all those years ago. The difference is, this time, I'm not staying silent. You probably don't remember me. I was the elderly woman in the blue dress who watched your entire session that day. I counted the smiles you gave. 23. I counted the interruptions. 15. I noticed who received which. My grandson asks me why things haven't changed. I used to tell him they had. Now I wonder if I was wrong. You have power, Judge Reeves, but with it comes responsibility, not just to uphold the law, but to see the humanity in each person who stands before you. I'm not writing to shame you. I'm writing because I believe people can change when they see themselves clearly. Sincerely, Eleanor Johnson, former civil rights activist, current grandmother. The letter trembled in his hands. Judge Reeves turned to his window, watching people climb the courthouse steps. For the first time in years, he really looked at them. Their nervous adjustments of clothing, their hopeful expressions, their humanity. His phone buzzed. Another email from the Judicial Conduct Board. The investigation was proceeding. Social media burned with hashtags about his courtroom. Local news vans parked outside tracked his every movement. But it was Mrs. Johnson's words that echoed. I believe people can change when they see themselves clearly. He reached for his phone, dialing a number he'd never called before. Justice Reform Initiative. This is Judge William Reeves. I've been following your work on judicial bias awareness. I'd like to learn more. The conversation lasted an hour. By its end, Judge Reeves had volunteered to participate in their upcoming workshop, not as an observer, but as a case study. Later that afternoon, he submitted a formal letter to the Judicial Conduct Board. Instead of defending his actions, he acknowledged the pattern in his rulings and requested a comprehensive review of his cases. He also asked to address the board in person. Maria Rodriguez, organizing files at her clerk's desk, looked up to see Judge Reeves approaching. She straightened, uncertain. Ms. Rodriguez, he began, his voice lacking its usual authority. I understand you've been documenting my court sessions. Maria held her ground. Yes, Your Honor. It's part of my duty to ensure accurate records. He nodded slowly. You did the right thing. I need your help identifying cases that require review. The silence between them held years of unspoken observations. Finally, Maria spoke. I'll prepare a comprehensive list, Your Honor. As news of Judge Reeves' voluntary cooperation spread, Sarah received another message from James Chen. Something unprecedented is happening. Judge Reeves has requested a public hearing, not to defend himself, but to address every person he may have treated unfairly. Sarah stared at the message, thinking of Mrs. Johnson's letter that had started this unexpected turn. Sometimes the most powerful words came not from lawyers or journalists, but from a grandmother who refused to be silent. 6 months later, Sarah Thompson stood at the podium in the courthouse auditorium, facing a room filled with judges, lawyers, and community members. The newly formed Judicial Fairness Committee had invited her to speak at their inaugural training session. "Change," she began, her teacher's voice carrying clearly through the room, "often starts with a single moment of truth. For me, it was standing in courtroom 304. For others, it was reading Mrs. Johnson's letter. For Judge Reeves, it was choosing to look at himself honestly." In the front row, Judge Reeves sat beside Eleanor Johnson, both now regular speakers at judicial training sessions. The past months had transformed the courthouse. New monitoring procedures tracked judicial decisions for patterns of bias. Weekly community feedback sessions allowed citizens to share their experiences. Every judge underwent regular bias awareness training. But the real change, Sarah continued, happens in small moments. It happens when a judge takes time to truly listen, when a clerk speaks up about what they observe, when community members share their stories. The changes had rippled beyond their courthouse. 3 other districts had adopted their monitoring program. Law schools requested their training materials. The state Supreme Court cited their initiatives as a model for judicial reform. Maria Rodriguez, now promoted to Chief Court Administrator, stood to present the latest data. The numbers told a story of transformation. Disparities in rulings had dropped significantly across all demographics, but more importantly, public trust in the court system had risen. Judge Reeves approached the podium next. His demeanor had changed over the months, humbler, more reflective, yet somehow carrying more true authority than before. 6 months ago, he began, I thought justice meant maintaining control of my courtroom. Mrs. Johnson taught me that real justice requires something harder, the courage to examine our own hearts. He turned to Sarah. Miss Thompson's case could have been just another fine, another dismissal of evidence. Instead, it became a catalyst for change, not because of anger or accusations, but because people like Maria Rodriguez kept careful records, because James Chen built a case based on facts, because Taylor Martinez reported the story with integrity. In the audience, Sarah's 3rd grade class sat with their parents. She'd invited them to see civic engagement in action. Little Marcus raised his hand, and Judge Reeves smiled. Yes, young man. Sir, remember when you visited our class? You said justice means everyone gets a fair chance. Is that happening now? The room fell silent, waiting for the judge's response. We're working on it every day, Judge Reeves answered honestly. And thanks to people like your teacher, we're getting better at it. After the session, Sarah lingered in the auditorium. She watched as Judge Reeves chatted with her students, as Maria shared plans for expanding their programs, as Mrs. Johnson hugged young lawyers eager to learn from her experience. James Chen approached, holding a fresh set of data. Ready for Phase 2. 10 more districts want to implement our program. Sarah smiled, thinking of that first day in court. You know what my students learned from all this. They learned that change doesn't always come from big protests or dramatic moments. Sometimes it comes from spreadsheets, careful documentation, and people willing to look at uncomfortable truths. As she gathered her materials to leave, Sarah passed courtroom 304. Through the window, she could see another judge presiding, one of their newly trained colleagues. On the wall hung the new sign, Justice thrives where dignity lives. Her phone buzzed. A message from her father. Proud of you, baby girl. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You helped build something that will last. Sarah stepped into the afternoon sun, knowing that somewhere in the courthouse, another person was facing their moment of truth. But now, they wouldn't face it alone.